everyone and welcome to Wormwood Tales. Relax and enjoy the story for sleep video. Before you drift off, I thought it would be a fun idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Let's begin. A thick, creeping fog rolls over the French Quarter, blanketing the streets and giving the gas lamps a ghostly glow as a small tour group gathers at the gates of the infamous Lalaurie mansion. The guide, a sharp-eyed woman with a slow, deliberate voice, begins her tale in a whisper that barely rises above the rustling leaves. She paints a grim picture of the 1800s when the mansion was a house of horrors, recounting how Madame Delphine Lalaurie, the once respected socialite, hid a monstrous side, committing atrocities within these walls. Clara, a young woman in her early 30s with an insatiable curiosity for untold history, stands at the back, watching the guide closely, a skeptical half-smile on her face. To Clara, the stories seem like exaggerated folklore, tales meant to thrill tourists, not real accounts. An amateur historian with a fascination for debunking myths, Clara scoffs at the notion that spirits linger in the Lalaurie mansion. She's come along with the tour, not to be spooked, but to dissect the truth from the layers of rumor and legend that have grown like vines around this place over centuries. As the guide's voice lowers to speak of restless spirits and paranormal encounters of shadows that glide across empty rooms, of chilling cries heard at midnight, Clara feels her skepticism waver, just a touch. A prickling sensation crawls up her spine, though she quickly shrugs it off. However, as the group finishes their tour and begins filing out, Clara feels a strange pull to stay behind. She hesitates, her eyes drifting up to the mansion's upper windows, where the curtains seem to shift, as if someone were watching from within. When she's certain no one from the group notices, Clara slips away from the crowd and steps back inside the mansion's grand entry hall, breathing in the thick, musty air. The door creaks closed behind her, echoing in the vast, empty space. Clara stands alone, surrounded by the history she has longed to explore, a history that now seems to be watching her, waiting for her to make the next move. As Clara's eyes adjust to the dim light inside the mansion, a shiver runs down her spine. The air is heavier than she expected, thick with an odd, suffocating silence that seems to absorb every sound. The mansion's grand entry hall, with its peeling wallpaper and tarnished chandeliers, feels frozen in time. Shadows cling to the walls, almost seeming to grow darker the longer she stares. Clara takes a cautious step forward, her fingers brushing the banister of the grand staircase. She's read countless accounts of the horrors that allegedly took place here, but now, standing alone, she finds herself wrestling with a peculiar sense of unease. It's as if the mansion itself is silently urging her to listen, to understand. She can almost hear whispers beneath the silence, faint, unintelligible murmurs that seem to drift from nowhere in particular, curling around her thoughts like smoke. As she makes her way deeper into the mansion, Clara finds herself inexplicably drawn to a set of portraits lining the hallway walls. They're faded and cracked, faces that stare back at her with eyes that once held secrets, eyes that may have witnessed the horrors of Madame Lalaurie's reign firsthand. She studies each face, feeling a strange connection to them, as though the figures are somehow reaching out across time, wanting to be seen, to be remembered. A noise breaks her trance, a faint, scraping sound from upstairs. Clara's pulse quickens as she tells herself it's nothing more than the house settling, an old mansion groaning under the weight of years. But another sound follows, the unmistakable creak of floorboards, as if footsteps were trailing just above her. Her logical mind tells her to turn back, that she's letting the stories get to her. Yet she finds herself drawn toward the source of the noise. She takes a step up the staircase, her hand still on the banister, and for a moment, it feels as though an icy hand clasps her own. She gasps, jerking her hand back, but the strange sensation fades as quickly as it came, leaving her wondering if she imagined it. Clara steels herself and presses on, climbing the staircase to the second floor, the sense of something watching her growing stronger with every step. The silence thickens, interrupted only by her soft footsteps echoing against the walls. When she reaches the top of the stairs, she looks down a narrow, darkened hallway that stretches ahead of her. In the dim light, she can barely make out the frames of more portraits, and something about this floor feels different, as if the walls are closing in, carrying the weight of centuries of secrets and suffering. Then, from the end of the hall, she hears it, a low, anguished moan, so faint it could almost be mistaken for the wind. It prickles the hairs on the back of her neck, yet curiosity drives her forward. She inches down the hallway, feeling as though she's moving through a dream, her senses blurring, her footsteps slowing, as if the house itself wants her to stop, to listen, to remember. When she finally reaches the end of the hall, she stops in front of a large, antique mirror. It's covered in a thick layer of dust, but as she peers closer, she can just make out her own reflection and then something else. The dust begins to clear, revealing a second face in the mirror, faint and shadowed, standing just behind her. She whirls around, but there's no one there. Heart pounding, Clara stares at the mirror, unsure if her eyes are playing tricks on her. But then she sees it again, a figure, almost translucent, moving slowly in the reflection, with eyes that burn with silent rage, staring directly into her own. The whispers rise again, louder this time, filling her mind with fragments of long-forgotten cries and whispered confessions. It's as if the mansion itself is drawing her in, urging her to witness the past, to uncover the horrors that have been hidden behind these walls for far too long. And Clara realizes, with a chill, that she's no longer just here for a tour. She's part of the story now, bound to the mansion's secrets that are just beginning to unravel. As Clara's gaze remains fixed on the mirror, a chilling wave of realization washes over her. The figure in the reflection doesn't move like a trick of the light, it's deliberate, shifting in the shadows with a dark, looming presence. It's a woman's silhouette, elegant yet hollow, her head tilted at an unnatural angle as though she's peering directly into Clara's soul. Clara's breath catches as she takes in the details: the high-necked dress, the hollow eyes, and the faint, cold smile hovering on her lips. Could this be the infamous Madame Delphine Lalaurie herself? Clara steps back instinctively, her heartbeat quickening, but she can't tear her eyes away. It's as if some invisible force has locked her in place, compelling her to watch. The figure in the mirror begins to glide forward, coming closer, her form growing more defined with every passing second. Clara can almost feel the cold radiating from the apparition, filling the narrow hallway with an unnatural chill that seeps into her bones. A voice, faint and fragmented, begins to echo in her mind, blending with the silence around her. It's a low, raspy whisper, each word dripping with bitterness and despair. The voice is saying her name, Clara, as if beckoning her, inviting her deeper into the mansion's secrets. She feels a pull, a magnetic force urging her to listen, to understand, to stay. Then, in the reflection, Clara sees something that makes her blood run cold. Behind the figure of Madame Lalaurie, shadowy forms emerge, lining the walls like a procession of phantoms. Their faces are twisted with anguish, eyes sunken and pleading, reaching out as though they're caught in an endless loop of suffering. These are the spirits of those who once suffered here, Clara realizes with horror, trapped echoes of Madame Lalaurie's victims, their silent screams stretching across the ages. Just as Clara's knees weaken, threatening to give way under the weight of the haunting scene, a cold, tangible force brushes against her shoulder. She whips around, heart racing, but finds nothing behind her except the empty hallway. When she turns back to the mirror, the faces have vanished, leaving only her own pale reflection staring back. Desperate for some semblance of control, Clara stumbles backward, her breaths shallow and rapid. But as she turns to flee, she feels the floorboards groan beneath her feet, almost as if they're resisting her departure. The whispers intensify, more urgent now, filling her mind with fragments of past lives, cries for justice, and the chilling refrain of her own name. Clara's rational mind is screaming at her to leave, to escape this place, but something holds her back, a compulsion that feels too powerful to resist. Her curiosity, once grounded in skepticism, has morphed into an insatiable need to uncover what really happened within these walls. But there's something more, something darker, that lingers just beneath the surface of her thoughts. The mansion, she realizes with a creeping sense of dread, isn't merely haunted by the ghosts of its past. It's alive, and it's chosen her. As she stands alone in the mansion, a final, ominous thought settles into her mind. She might have come here to investigate a legend, but now, she's no longer sure she'll ever leave. Clara's pulse quickens, every instinct screaming at her to turn back, but her legs feel leaden, as though the floor itself is binding her in place. She glances toward the grand staircase, the path she had come up only moments ago, but the shadows have thickened, swallowing the light and making it seem miles away. A flickering candle down the hall catches her eye, its flame dim yet persistent, as if beckoning her. The candle shouldn't be there, she's certain no one lit it, and yet it burns, casting eerie, wavering shadows across the walls. Clara's curiosity overrides her fear, and, almost in a trance, she moves toward it, each step echoing in the suffocating silence of the hallway. As she approaches, she realizes the candle sits on a small, polished table beneath another portrait, this one even older and more sinister looking than the others. The subject is a woman in a black lace dress, her face expressionless, eyes sharp and penetrating. Madame Lalaurie's eyes. The candlelight illuminates her gaze, making it seem as though she's staring directly at Clara, her painted eyes glinting with a dark, timeless malice. Clara's throat tightens as she studies the painting. It's uncanny, the woman's gaze feels almost alive, as if it holds the mansion's secrets. A dark thought crawls into Clara's mind. What if those secrets are bound to her now? What if she, too, becomes another one of the mansion's silent echoes, trapped and voiceless? Just then, a low, guttural murmur rises from somewhere down the hall. The hairs on her arms stand up as the sound grows louder, reverberating through the floorboards, a muffled chorus of voices layered in pain and fury. It's as if the walls themselves are breathing, exhaling the pent-up agony of the souls within. Clara stumbles backward, her skin tingling with dread. The murmur rises into a chilling whisper, a single phrase repeated over and over, wrapping around her like a dark lullaby, "You shouldn't have come." Suddenly, a door down the hallway creaks open, its hinges moaning in protest, revealing a dimly lit room beyond. Shadows shift and undulate inside, as though something alive is waiting, watching. Clara's heart pounds, and her instincts scream to leave, to turn and run. But her feet refuse to obey, rooted to the spot as if the house itself has claimed her. She takes an involuntary step toward the room, then another, each one feeling heavier than the last. When she reaches the threshold, Clara hesitates, gripping the doorframe, her knuckles white with tension. The air inside the room is cold, thick with the scent of decay and something else, something sweet and sickly, like burnt sugar and rot. Her eyes scan the dim space, landing on an old, dust-covered chaise and a large, ornate mirror leaning against the wall. The same mirror she had seen in the hallway. A chill runs down her spine as she realizes the mirror has somehow moved, as though it's been waiting for her. She steps inside, drawn forward despite her terror, compelled to confront whatever truth lies within its glass. Her reflection appears, pale and wide-eyed, but there's something else, a faint, shifting darkness just behind her, taking shape. As she watches, paralyzed with fear, the figure solidifies into the unmistakable form of Madame Lalaurie, her spectral face twisted in a malicious grin. The ghostly woman's hand reaches out in the reflection, stretching toward Clara's shoulder, her touch just inches away. Clara's breath catches, her body frozen, as if the mansion itself has claimed her, holding her captive in its web of shadows and secrets. Then, in a chilling whisper that echoes through the room, Madame Lalaurie's voice cuts through the silence, "Now, you belong to us." The candle flickers, and in that instant, the room plunges into darkness. The silence is absolute, thick, and oppressive, as if the walls have closed in, sealing Clara's fate. She opens her mouth to scream, but no sound escapes, her voice swallowed by the mansion's grasp. As the tour guide's voice echoes in the entry hall, she describes Madame Delphine Lalaurie's life in exquisite, unsettling detail. Once a revered socialite of the French Quarter, Madame Lalaurie was known for her lavish soirees and refined manners, but behind her graceful facade lay something far darker. The guide speaks of the hidden rooms discovered after a fire, rooms where unspeakable acts were committed, slaves bound and shackled, enduring cruel punishments at the hands of their mistress. The locals say Madame Lalaurie was not only ruthless but possessed, her eyes cold and calculating even as she inflicted pain. Clara, a skeptic by nature, lingers at the back of the group, listening intently. She's here to separate fact from legend, curious to know if Madame Delphine Lalaurie was indeed the monster the rumors describe or if these tales were exaggerated over time. An amateur historian, Clara believes there's often truth hidden within even the darkest myths, but she doubts the whispers of Madame's spirit lingering in the mansion. Yet, as the guide leads the group outside, Clara feels an inexplicable urge to stay. Her gaze lifts to a window on the upper floor, where she's sure she saw a flicker of movement, a figure in a dark dress, watching her with eyes that seem all too real. But the room is empty, she tells herself, the stories are only stories. Even so, she finds herself moving closer to the grand staircase, compelled to explore, to understand what truly happened here. The tour guide calls for everyone to exit, but Clara slips away from the group, her footsteps quiet as she steps back into the shadows of the entry hall. The heavy, ominous air presses around her, filled with the faint scent of smoke and something metallic, like old blood. The silence feels almost too still, as though the mansion itself is holding its breath, watching. Clara ventures up the staircase, her fingers grazing the banister. It's then she notices the walls are lined with portraits, each one bearing the severe, unsettling gaze of Madame Lalaurie herself. Each pair of eyes seems to follow her with a strange intensity, and she could almost swear one of them has shifted, the lips curling into a cold, knowing smile. A shiver runs through her as she reaches the top of the stairs. Just then, a whisper fills the air, unmistakably a woman's voice, soft yet commanding, "You shouldn't have come here." Clara's heart skips, and she looks around, but the hall is empty. The voice sounded so close, so real. Every instinct tells her to turn back, but she's drawn forward, feeling as though Madame Lalaurie herself is pulling her deeper into the mansion, demanding her attention. She approaches a doorway at the end of the hall, where the faint light of a single candle flickers. In the dim light, Clara glimpses a dusty mirror against the wall, and within its glass, she sees not only her own reflection but the shadowy figure of Madame Delphine Lalaurie herself, standing just behind her, her eyes glinting with something dark and ancient. The woman's face is twisted in a malevolent smile, her presence unmistakable, as though she's waiting for Clara to take one step closer to join her in the endless shadows of the Lalaurie mansion. Clara's breath catches, her gaze fixed on Madame Lalaurie's spectral figure in the mirror. The image seems to ripple, dark eyes burning into her as though reaching across centuries, daring her to confront the truth. For a split second, Clara wants to turn and run, but a strange, invisible force compels her to stay. The faint candlelight flickers, casting eerie shadows on Madame Lalaurie's face, accentuating her cruel smile. The figure moves, her ghostly reflection shifting closer, as if stepping forward from the shadows of time. Clara feels an icy chill slide across her neck, a feeling so real that she instinctively touches the spot, half expecting to feel the skeletal fingers of Madame Lalaurie herself. But there's nothing, just the cold weight of dread settling deeper into her bones. The whispers start again, this time louder, layered, as though multiple voices are speaking at once. The words are unintelligible, but Clara senses the anguish and desperation behind them. These aren't just echoes of the past, they're cries for justice, for liberation, trapped within the walls of the mansion, unable to escape the grip of Madame Lalaurie's legacy. Clara takes a hesitant step forward, her eyes never leaving the mirror, as the ghostly figure of Madame Lalaurie begins to speak, her voice a chilling murmur that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. They didn't understand, they couldn't appreciate what I gave them. The words are spoken with a strange, twisted pride, and Clara feels a surge of anger, a dark, consuming emotion that doesn't feel like her own. It's as if Madame Lalaurie's essence is seeping into her, sharing fragments of her thoughts, her memories. The mansion isn't just haunted, it's alive with Madame Lalaurie's spirit, feeding on those who dare to probe its secrets. Clara finds herself stepping toward the room just beyond the mirror, a hidden parlor filled with dust-covered furniture and tattered drapes, as though untouched since the days of Lalaurie's reign. The temperature drops, her breath visible in the cold, stagnant air. In the corner of the room stands an ancient, rusted cage far too small for an adult, but unmistakably designed to confine a human. Revulsion churns in Clara's stomach, yet she's unable to look away. She's drawn to the cage, her hand reaching out, compelled to touch the chilling iron bars. The moment her fingers brush the metal, a wave of memories crashes over her, visions of tortured faces, whispered pleas, and the overwhelming presence of Madame Lalaurie, watching it all with cold detachment. Suddenly, she's no longer in the room but in a dark, suffocating void. Clara feels hands on her shoulders, forcing her down, binding her, as though she's one of Madame Lalaurie's victims. The pain is sharp, overwhelming, filling her mind with screams that aren't her own. She struggles, but the pressure only intensifies, as if Madame Lalaurie's spirit is determined to keep her here, to make her suffer as her victims once did. Then, just as abruptly, the vision fades, and she's back in the parlor, gasping for breath, the shadows pressing in around her. Madame Lalaurie's voice fills her mind once more, a chilling whisper, laced with satisfaction. You wanted to see the truth, didn't you, Clara? Now you're part of it. Clara stumbles backward, her heart pounding as she realizes the weight of the words. She came here as a skeptic, but now she's bound to the horrors of the Lalaurie mansion. The walls pulse around her, alive with Madame Lalaurie's twisted pride, and Clara understands with a sickening certainty that she may never leave this place. The mansion has claimed her, and she, like the souls before her, is now part of Madame Lalaurie's eternal, horrific legacy. Clara's breathing grows shallow, panic clawing its way into her mind as she backs away from the cage. She turns, desperate to find an exit, but the room has changed. The door she entered through is gone, replaced by a solid wall. The flickering candle on the table is now the only source of light, casting long, ominous shadows across the room. In the dim glow, Clara catches a glimpse of movement, figures shifting within the shadows, their forms flickering in and out like faint, tortured memories. As her eyes adjust, she realizes they are the restless spirits of Madame Lalaurie's victims, their faces etched with suffering, their eyes hollow and empty. They reach out to her, their mouths opening in silent screams, as though begging her for something: release, understanding, or perhaps to join them in their endless torment. Her heart races as she edges backward, but a force presses against her, preventing her from moving. It's like an invisible barrier, pulsing with an unnatural energy that holds her firmly in place. Madame Lalaurie's cold laughter echoes through the room, reverberating off the walls, a sinister melody that seems to seep into Clara's very soul. They all wanted to leave, the voice sneers, coming from everywhere and nowhere. But their fates were sealed, just as yours is now. A wave of despair washes over Clara as she realizes the full extent of her predicament. She isn't just trapped in the mansion, she's ensnared in Madame Lalaurie's web, woven into the fabric of her twisted legacy. The walls seem to close in, alive with the tormented souls who have become part of this haunted place. She feels their anguish, their despair, each one a fragment of Madame Lalaurie's cruelty. Suddenly, a searing pain shoots through her head, as if 1,000 voices are screaming in unison, filling her mind with unbearable noise. Images flash before her eyes, flashes of faces, ghostly pale hands reaching out, chains clinking, the sound of tortured cries echoing in the darkness. It's as though she's being forced to witness the suffering that once took place here, an endless cycle of horror from which there is no escape. Through the cacophony, Madame Lalaurie's voice rises, dark and commanding. You wanted the truth, Clara. Now you are a part of it. Clara's knees give out, and she falls to the floor, her hands pressing against her ears in a futile attempt to block out the noise. She feels Madame Lalaurie's presence drawing closer, an icy chill pressing down on her, suffocating and inescapable. In the corner of her eye, she sees a dark shape looming, Madame Lalaurie's spectral form taking shape, her expression twisted with a satisfaction that chills Clara to the core. But amid the terror, a faint whisper rises within Clara, a defiant spark flickering in the depths of her mind. She remembers why she came here, to uncover the truth, to understand the real history of the Lalaurie mansion. And in that moment, she realizes that as long as she's still alive, she can fight. With every ounce of strength she has left, Clara pushes herself to her feet. She focuses her thoughts, blocking out the maddening whispers and relentless visions, grounding herself in the present. She glares at Madame Lalaurie's ghostly figure, summoning all her courage as she speaks. You don't own me, Lalaurie, Clara says, her voice trembling but resolute. I came here for answers, and I'm leaving with them. Madame Lalaurie's expression shifts, the cruel satisfaction fading into something darker, angrier. The shadows around her intensify, and the whispers rise into a deafening roar, as though the mansion itself is rebelling against Clara's defiance. The walls begin to shake, dust falling from the ceiling as the house trembles with an otherworldly rage. Clara feels the floor beneath her feet shift, and she stumbles toward the wall, pressing herself against it for support. But she refuses to look away from Madame Lalaurie's ghost, her eyes locked onto the spirit's cold, malevolent gaze. You may have trapped others, but not me, Clara says, her voice gaining strength. You're just a memory, a monster who feeds on fear. And I refuse to give you mine. With those words, Clara feels a surge of warmth within her, a fierce determination that pushes back against the darkness. The shadows waver, flickering as though losing their grip. Madame Lalaurie's figure begins to dissolve, her form flickering, her expression twisted with rage as she realizes she's losing her hold. The oppressive weight lifts, and the walls stop trembling. The whispers fade, replaced by a silence that feels almost deafening in its suddenness. Clara takes a shaky breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs, and realizes with relief that the presence is gone. Madame Lalaurie's spirit has vanished, leaving only an empty room, silent and still. As the first light of dawn begins to seep through a crack in the shutters, Clara finally turns and finds the door has reappeared. With a final glance at the room, she steps through it, feeling a mix of exhaustion and triumph. She survived, and as she crosses the threshold and steps back into the early morning light, she knows she's free. But as she walks down the quiet street, leaving the mansion behind, a cold whisper echoes in her mind, faint yet unmistakable. This isn't over. As Clara steps onto the quiet street, the eerie chill of the Lalaurie mansion lingers, curling around her like a ghostly fog that refuses to let go. She looks back at the looming building, now bathed in the soft light of dawn. Its windows stare back at her, hollow and empty, yet somehow aware. Despite the faint warmth of the morning sun, Clara can't shake the feeling that she's being watched. The city stirs awake around her, the streets of New Orleans slowly filling with the usual sounds of life, street vendors setting up, the distant sound of jazz music floating through the air, people hurrying to their morning routines. But Clara feels apart from it all, still bound to the dark secrets she uncovered during the night. She can feel the mansion's pull even now, as though an invisible thread connects her to its shadows, drawing her back. As she heads toward her apartment, her mind replays the terrifying visions, the suffocating darkness, and the searing whispers. But one question burns brightest: why did she feel that strange, personal connection to Madame Lalaurie? It was as if the ghost knew her, as if she'd been expecting her. Clara shakes her head, hoping a hot shower and some sleep will clear away the lingering dread. Yet, as she arrives home, she notices something strange. Sitting on her doorstep is a small, leather-bound book, its cover worn and cracked with age. She looks around, wondering who could have left it there, but the street is empty. Cautiously, she picks it up, feeling the weight of the book, sensing the energy that clings to it, thick and old. Inside, the yellowed pages are filled with elegant handwriting, ornate and looping. It doesn't take long for Clara to realize that the writing belongs to none other than Madame Delphine Lalaurie. Shocked, she scans the pages, her heart racing as she reads entry after entry, each one revealing fragments of Madame Lalaurie's mind, her twisted justifications, her rituals, the chilling depths of her cruelty. But there's something else. Clara turns to a page where her own name is written in faded ink, as though scrawled hastily. The words that follow chill her to her core. Clara. I knew you would come, just as I knew you would leave. But you, like the others, are bound to this place. You belong to me now. A cold sweat breaks out across Clara's skin. The words blur as she stares at the page, the ink shifting as if alive, reforming into different letters. They rearrange themselves into a message, one that feels like a direct threat. You can never escape me. Panicked, Clara slams the book shut and stumbles back, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The room feels colder, the walls pressing in around her, filled with the dark energy she thought she'd left behind in the mansion. She hears the faint echo of Madame Lalaurie's laughter, a sinister whisper that fills the silence. Her hand trembles as she places the book down, backing away from it like it's a venomous creature ready to strike. She knows she can't keep it here, yet part of her is terrified to abandon it. The book feels like a tether, binding her to the Lalaurie mansion, to the nightmare she thought she'd escaped. Suddenly, the room grows darker, and Clara's vision blurs. She feels the same suffocating sensation she experienced in the mansion, as though Madame Lalaurie's spirit is wrapping around her, tightening its grip. Her body feels heavy, rooted in place, unable to move or scream. Shadows gather at the edges of her vision, and in the dimness, she sees the ghostly figure of Madame Lalaurie once more, standing in the corner, her eyes glinting with a dark, possessive satisfaction. Did you think you could leave? Madame Lalaurie's voice is cold and mocking, her form growing clearer, more solid, as though she's drawing strength from Clara's fear. Clara struggles to speak, her voice barely a whisper. What do you want from me? Madame Lalaurie steps closer, her figure almost tangible, a twisted smile curling across her pale face. I want what is mine. And you, Clara, are now part of my legacy. With those words, the room plunges into darkness, and Clara feels herself pulled into a suffocating void, a darkness as deep as the horrors of the Lalaurie mansion. The ghost's cold laughter fills her mind, echoing as Clara's vision fades, leaving her trapped in the shadows. When Clara opens her eyes, she's standing in the Lalaurie mansion once more, back in the parlor with its dusty, untouched furniture and that terrible, iron cage. The door slams shut behind her, locking her inside, and Madame Lalaurie's voice whispers in her ear, filled with dark triumph. Welcome home. Clara's footsteps echo through the grand hallway as she wanders deeper into the mansion. The low, creaking sound of the wooden floorboards beneath her feet feels almost too loud in the thick silence, as if the house is listening. The temperature drops, and she pulls her coat tighter around her, trying to shake the unease creeping up her spine. At first, she dismisses the faint whispers, assuming they are remnants of the tour group's voices still echoing in the building. But as she ventures further, the whispers seem to shift, coming from different directions, like they're circling her. Clara freezes in place, her breath visible in the suddenly frigid air. The cold isn't normal, it feels invasive, biting at her skin, crawling up her neck. Then, the footsteps begin. Soft at first, like someone walking just behind her, but with each passing second, they grow louder and closer. Clara spins around, expecting to see a lingering tour member, but there's no one. The hallway stretches out in both directions, empty and dimly lit by the flickering light of the old chandeliers overhead. She starts to feel the weight of the silence pressing down on her. It's just the house settling, she tells herself, though her heart begins to race. She quickens her pace, hoping to reach the front door, but before she can, a gust of wind slams through the hall from nowhere. The cold rushes over her, sending a shiver so intense it feels like it's coming from within her bones. She stops, her breath catching in her throat. The air is thick now, too heavy to breathe, as if the house is suffocating her. She takes another step, and that's when she sees them, shadows stretching across the walls. At first, they seem like mere tricks of the light, but the longer she stares, the more unsettling they become. They don't move with her. They twist and elongate, contorting into grotesque shapes. Some of them are human figures, others are distorted, misshapen. Clara's skin prickles. This can't be happening, she thinks, but she can't look away. She watches as one of the shadows suddenly snaps to life, darting across the wall in the blink of an eye. The sound of it scraping against the wall like nails on chalkboard makes her stomach turn. Her breathing grows shallow. She's no longer alone. She can feel the eyes of the house on her, watching, waiting. The air grows thick with something unspoken, a presence that wasn't there before. Her own shadow seems to stretch, unnaturally long, as if it too is being pulled into something far darker than the cold walls of the mansion. Panicked, Clara hurries toward the front door, desperate to escape. She reaches for the handle, but as her fingers graze the cold metal, it slams shut. The sound is deafening, as if the house is closing her in, trapping her inside. She pulls at the door, but it refuses to budge, like a steel wall is locking her in place. The whispers rise, turning into voices now, distinct but incomprehensible, growing louder, urging her to stay, to listen, to become part of the mansion's history. Clara backs away from the door, her heart thudding in her chest. The whispers are all around her now. The shadows seem to shift, stretching and contracting, moving closer to her like something alive, as if the very walls are watching, judging. She feels a presence near her ear, cold and foul, whispering in a voice she almost recognizes, "Don't leave. You belong to us now." Her breath catches. No, this is insane, she thinks, but the grip of fear is tightening around her throat. She's no longer sure if she can trust her own senses. The mansion is alive with its horrors, and Clara is just another victim waiting to be claimed. Clara's footsteps echo through the grand hallway, each step seeming to draw her deeper into the mansion's grip. The house feels impossibly still, as if it's holding its breath, waiting for her to notice something or someone. She tells herself it's just her nerves, but there's an unsettling weight to the silence that presses against her chest. She's alone now, or so she thinks. As Clara roams further, the air grows unnaturally cold. Her breath comes out in visible puffs, and she pulls her coat tighter around her shoulders. She tries to focus, to make sense of her surroundings, but something doesn't feel right. The shadows cast by the flickering chandeliers seem to move with her, stretching and shifting in ways that don't make sense. The whispers begin soft, faint, and unintelligible. Clara spins around, but there's no one. The hallway is empty. It's just the house settling, she tells herself. But then a cold breeze rips through the air, biting at her skin. The temperature drops so quickly that Clara shudders violently. Her heart beats faster as she hears the footsteps behind her, light, slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere in the shadows. She freezes, feeling the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She knows she isn't alone anymore. She turns around, but there's no one there. The footsteps stop. And then, a voice. "Don't leave me, dear." The voice is soft, melodic, but icy. Clara's blood runs cold as the words seem to flow through the air, seeping into her ears like poison. The voice is so clear, so commanding, that Clara stumbles backward, instinctively reaching for the door she came through. But it's locked. She presses her palms to it, but it won't budge. The whispers grow louder, more urgent, but now Clara can hear them clearly. They aren't just echoes. They are calling her name as if they've known her all along. Suddenly, a figure steps out from the shadows. Clara freezes, her breath catching in her throat. A woman stands before her, tall, regal, and dressed in a long, flowing gown that seems out of place in this crumbling house. Her face is pale, gaunt, with sharp features too sharp, as if carved from bone. Her eyes are dark, bottomless, and full of something cold and predatory. The woman smiles, a smile that doesn't reach her eyes. "I've been waiting for someone like you," the woman says. Her voice is soft, but there's an edge to it like it could cut through steel. Clara's pulse quickens, but she can't tear her eyes away from the woman's face. Madame Lalaurie, Clara realizes with a sickening jolt. The stories, the horrors, the whispers of the past, they're all true. The woman tilts her head, her smile widening. "You want to understand, don't you?" she whispers. "You want to know what happened here? You want to know why I did it?" The shadows around them twist, elongating into grotesque forms, figures chained in agony, faces contorted in pain. Clara stumbles back, her heart pounding in her chest. She sees the dark memories of the mansion coming alive around her, the tortured souls that once wandered here, trapped in a nightmare that never ends. Madame Lalaurie steps closer, and Clara feels an overwhelming cold seep into her bones. "You're here now, Clara. You can't leave." The name comes from her lips with a strange, knowing familiarity, sending a chill through Clara's body. She hasn't spoken it aloud, has she? The shadows creep closer, pressing in around her. Clara feels as though the mansion itself is breathing with her, its walls closing in tighter, darker. She looks at Madame Lalaurie, but the woman's gaze is locked on her, like a predator fixated on its prey. The room seems to darken even more, the air growing thicker with each passing moment. Clara's pulse races. "You will join us," Madame Lalaurie whispers, her voice now a sharp hiss. "Like all the others. Don't you want to see what I've made?" Clara tries to turn away, but her legs won't move. The shadows wrap around her like chains, pulling her in. As she looks toward the front door in desperation, the hinges groan in protest. It won't open. The house is alive, suffocating her, and Clara realizes she's not just trapped by its walls, she's trapped by the memory of Madame Lalaurie's terrible past. Suddenly, the woman steps forward, her cold hand brushing Clara's cheek. "You are mine now," she whispers, her breath ice against Clara's skin. Clara's heart pounds in her chest as Madame Lalaurie's cold fingers linger against her skin. The touch sends an icy shock through her body, paralyzing her for a moment as the shadows pulse around them. The whispers crescendo, almost deafening now, the voices of countless tortured souls pleading for release. Clara's breath becomes shallow, her vision blurring at the edges as the air seems to thicken, stifling her every movement. The mansion, alive with the weight of its dark past, seems to close in on Clara. The walls groan and shudder, as if reacting to the presence of Madame Lalaurie. Clara tries to step back, but her feet feel as though they are stuck to the floor. Her chest tightens. She can't breathe. "Why?" Clara gasps, the question escaping her lips before she can stop it. She doesn't even know if she's asking about the ghostly figure before her or the madness of the house itself. Madame Lalaurie smiles a thin, chilling smile, her eyes gleaming with something dark and unrelenting. She steps closer, her presence overpowering, her every movement purposeful, predatory. Why? Madame Lalaurie repeats, her voice laced with a sinister sweetness. Asterisk, you don't understand, do you? The pain, the suffering, it's what makes this house, what it is. It's what keeps me alive. She steps even closer, and Clara feels a presence pressing against her, a suffocating weight that pulls at her very soul. They never left, you see. All the ones I took, they never left. Not really. Clara's pulse races. She can feel the cold, bitter wind of death on the edges of her consciousness. The faces of the victims seem to press in from every direction, contorted in eternal agony. A boy's face appears in the corner of her vision, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. His hands are bound, and the shackles he wears rattle as if he's begging for release. Clara turns, stumbling backward, trying to shake off the images, but they persist. More faces, more whispers. They crowd around her, filling her ears, drowning out all else. It's too much. She tries to scream, but no sound escapes her lips. Don't fight it, Madame Lalaurie's voice floats toward her, like honey on a cold wind. Let me show you what I've done. What I had to do. Clara shakes her head frantically, trying to move, but her limbs feel heavier by the second, as if the house itself is weighing her down. She looks around, desperate for an escape, but every direction leads deeper into darkness. The shadows stretch across the floor like fingers reaching for her, tightening their grip with each passing moment. No, Clara whispers. I won't stay. I won't. But the door, the one she had been trying to reach, is now completely blocked, as though it has never existed. She is trapped, surrounded by the ghosts of those who once suffered in this cursed mansion. Suddenly, the mansion's haunting moans grow louder, as if it's waking up, awakening from centuries of slumber. The walls seem to pulse, and Clara hears the sound of chains dragging across the floor. The rattling grows louder, closer. She turns around, her body frozen in terror, and there they are, figures moving in the dark, dragging their shackles as they crawl toward her. Their faces are twisted, bodies broken, and their eyes wide with an endless, hollow stare. Clara can see them clearly now. These are not just shadows or fleeting images, these are the souls of Madame Lalaurie's victims. They have returned, and they have not forgiven. With a guttural screech, one of the figures lunges toward her, its arms reaching for her throat. Clara gasps, stumbling back, but the figure's grip is already around her wrist, pulling her closer. Please. Clara pleads, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of tortured whispers. Please, let me go. But Madame Lalaurie's cold laughter rings out, filling every corner of the room. You can't leave. You never can. Madame Lalaurie steps forward, her eyes gleaming with an ancient cruelty. You've seen too much now. You belong here, just like them. The figure pulling at Clara's wrist drags her toward the dark recesses of the mansion, toward a shadowed doorway that had once been hidden from view. Clara struggles, but the force of the souls surrounding her is overwhelming. As she's pulled toward the door, she hears a voice, a soft, broken whisper from the darkness beyond. Help us. She turns, trying to break free of the phantom grip that holds her, but there's no escape now. The house has claimed her. She's part of its dark history, one with the forgotten souls of the past. The doorway opens, revealing a dark cellar that seems to stretch far beyond the limits of the mansion. The air inside is thick with rot, and the walls are lined with rusted chains and broken bodies. Clara's heart pounds in her chest as she is dragged further into the bowels of the mansion. She sees shadows move along the edges of her vision, figures she can't quite make out, but whose eyes seem to follow her every move. With a final, desperate scream, Clara is swallowed by the darkness. The door slams shut behind her, and the mansion falls silent once again. The only sound is the faint whisper of a voice, echoing in the dark. Another soul, for Madame Lalaurie. Clara stumbles back, heart racing as she feels a cold, invisible hand brush against her neck. Her breath catches, and she spins around, but no one is there. The dim light from her flashlight flickers, casting unsettling shadows that seem to stretch and contract unnaturally. A soft whisper fills the air, faint but clear. Clara. The voice isn't her own mind playing tricks, it's unmistakably real. The sound is both chilling and alluring, as though it's calling her in, beckoning her to follow deeper into the mansion. She hesitates but feels an inexplicable pull, a force stronger than her skepticism. Reluctantly, she takes a few tentative steps, moving past decaying furniture and cobweb-covered paintings that appear almost alive in the dim glow of her flashlight. As she passes through a narrow hallway, the air thickens, heavy with the weight of history, the ghosts of the past pressing against her with every step. The temperature drops sharply, and she shivers, clutching her jacket tighter. The whispers intensify, now surrounding her, weaving in and out of her thoughts like a chorus of voices from another time. Clara, come closer. She reaches a room at the end of the hall, its door ajar. The moment she steps inside, the atmosphere shifts. Her flashlight flickers again, and the shadows on the walls twist into grotesque shapes. The room seems to breathe, as if the house itself is alive. The whispers grow louder, now a chorus of frantic voices, distorted with pain and pleading. Clara can barely distinguish the words, but they are unmistakable in their torment. Suddenly, the air grows thick with a stench of decay, and Clara's breath catches in her throat. She turns her head to the side, unable to look away as her eyes lock onto the first of the visions. Figures, pale and gaunt, dressed in tattered rags, emerge from the walls. Their hands are bound with chains, their bodies contorted in suffering, faces frozen in expressions of fear and agony. Clara stumbles backward, the flashlight beam wavering, casting strange shadows that dance across the room like an endless parade of the tormented. The room seems to pulse with the heartbeat of the house, the whispers growing more desperate, the figures more vivid. Clara cannot look away, though every instinct screams at her to run. The figures begin to move, walking in a slow, agonized shuffle, their eyes pleading with her as if they know she can see them, or worse, that she's part of their cycle now. A woman in the corner, her face twisted in an agonizing scream, reaches out with a bony hand. Clara's eyes widen, and she realizes the woman isn't just a phantom, she is part of a memory that plays out again and again, forever trapped in this house. A sudden flicker of light catches Clara's attention. Across the room, a shadow materializes. It's not just a shadow, it's an event frozen in time. Clara watches, frozen in place, as Madame Lalaurie herself steps into the room, her eyes cold and unfeeling. The infamous woman smiles with cruel satisfaction, directing her servants to torment the prisoners, the sound of chains dragging across the floor ringing in Clara's ears. She feels the weight of history pressing in on her chest, her heart pounding as the whispers crescendo to a terrifying pitch. This is more than a haunting. The mansion isn't just filled with restless spirits, it's a living memory, each ghost, each shadow, each whisper playing its part in a never-ending nightmare. Clara's mind begins to unravel the truth the house remembers. These aren't just ghosts trapped in time. They're the echoes of the atrocities that took place here, forever recorded in the very bones of the mansion. Every sound, every sigh of the wind, every creak of the floorboards is a replay of the horror that was once inflicted, a reminder that this place has never forgotten its past. Clara stands rooted to the spot, mesmerized by the vision of suffering that surrounds her. The ghostly figures don't plead for release, they plead for someone to remember, to bear witness to the horrors they endured. And Clara is the one who's been chosen to see it all. As her mind races, she hears the softest whisper of all, "You are part of it now." Clara stumbles back, heart racing as she feels a cold, invisible hand brush against her neck. Her breath catches, and she spins around, but no one is there. The dim light from her flashlight flickers, casting unsettling shadows that seem to stretch and contract unnaturally. A soft whisper fills the air, faint but clear. "Clara." The voice is unmistakable. It's as though the very walls of the mansion are calling her by name. It's chilling, and yet there's something oddly compelling about it, like the house itself is trying to pull her deeper. Against her better judgment, Clara takes a hesitant step forward, feeling the inexplicable weight of the atmosphere press against her. She doesn't believe in ghosts, not truly, but the whisper seems to demand that she follow. As she moves, the temperature in the room drops. A chill brushes against her skin, and she feels goosebumps rise along her arms. The whispers grow louder, now wrapping around her like a thick fog, impossible to ignore. The sound echoes in the hallways, pulling her forward, urging her deeper into the mansion's heart. She tries to resist, but the house seems to beckon with an irresistible force. "Clara, don't be afraid. We have been waiting for you." The voice is softer now, coaxing, almost seductive, and it lures her toward an ornate door at the end of the hall. With trembling hands, Clara pushes the door open, stepping into the room. The moment she crosses the threshold, the atmosphere shifts. The air grows heavy, suffocating, thick with the weight of unseen eyes. Her flashlight flickers and dies. In the eerie darkness, the shadows twist like liquid smoke, slithering along the walls. Then she sees them. At first, they're just silhouettes, faint outlines in the corners of the room, half-formed figures. But then they begin to emerge from the darkness, pale and gaunt, their bodies twisted in unnatural, contorted positions. They shuffle forward, shackles clinking, dragging their limbs in an agonizingly slow pace. The faces are twisted in expressions of pain and terror, eyes wide and hollow. Clara's breath catches in her throat. These aren't just ghosts. These are the tormented souls of those who suffered at the hands of Madame Delphine Lalaurie. As Clara stumbles back, the room feels like it's closing in on her. The whispers swirl, louder now, calling to her in different voices, begging her to see. "You have to understand." One voice pleads. "She made us, this way." Clara's eyes widen in disbelief as one of the figures steps forward, the faint outline of a woman. Her face is covered in blood, her skin pale and stretched tight over her bones. The woman's mouth moves, but no sound comes out until Clara hears it in her mind. "You have seen her, haven't you? Madame Lalaurie. She was the one who. Clara's mind spins as the figure's words fade into silence, but the room feels alive with energy. A cold, oppressive presence fills the space, and Clara feels it. Madame Lalaurie is here. Then, in the far corner of the room, Clara's flashlight flickers on again, casting a sharp beam of light across the walls. And there, standing at the edge of the shadows, is Madame Delphine Lalaurie herself. Clara freezes. The woman is tall and imposing, her eyes cold and calculating, a cruel smile curling at the corners of her lips. Madame Lalaurie's face is perfectly still, but there's a faint, almost imperceptible movement as if she's watching Clara, waiting. "You shouldn't have come here," Madame Lalaurie's voice cuts through the silence, her tone laced with both menace and amusement. The words hang in the air, thick with threat. "You're a witness now, just like them." Clara steps back, a sense of panic beginning to rise in her chest. The ghostly figures around her move closer, their eyes burning into her, accusing her, pleading with her to leave. But before she can turn and flee, the door slams shut behind her, trapping her in the room with Madame Lalaurie. Madame Lalaurie tilts her head, her smile never faltering. "Do you see now? Do you understand? This house, it remembers every scream, every tear, every moment of suffering. And I am the one who made them all, unforgettable." Clara feels the full weight of the history pressing down on her, the memories of cruelty, the unspeakable horrors of the past. It's not just a haunting. The mansion itself is a recording, playing out the suffering of the past over and over again. And now, Clara is caught in its cycle. The whispers return, louder than ever, wrapping around her like a suffocating veil. You are part of it now. The voice of Madame Lalaurie echoes in Clara's mind, and the figures of the tortured souls close in. Clara knows she can't escape. The mansion remembers, and so does she. Clara tries to move, but her legs feel heavy, as if the very air around her has thickened, pressing down on her chest. The cold, suffocating atmosphere fills the room, and the whispers grow louder, now a chorus of agonized voices. Her heartbeat quickens, matching the rising panic in her throat. Every step she takes seems to lead her deeper into the darkness, the room stretching impossibly far, distorting her sense of space. She turns back to the figure of Madame Lalaurie, who hasn't moved but watches Clara with an unnerving calm. The room is still and silent now, save for the soft echoes of chains dragging across the floor, the faintest sound of tortured souls in the walls. You should be honored, Madame Lalaurie's voice rings out, smooth and unsettling. You've been chosen to bear witness, to understand the weight of what was done here. They, the ones before you, their screams are eternal in this house. And you will become part of it. Clara's breath is shallow as her eyes dart around the room, desperately searching for an escape. But there is none. The door behind her remains shut tight, no matter how hard she pushes. The walls, once solid, now feel like they're closing in, shifting and bending as if the mansion itself is alive, growing hungry for her fear. Madame Lalaurie steps forward, her presence as cold as death itself. The eerie smile never leaves her face, but her eyes, those eyes are filled with an unsettling mixture of amusement and something darker. Her voice is a whisper that cuts through the room, so close to Clara's ear it sends a shiver down her spine. You are walking in the footsteps of those who came before you. This house was built on suffering, and its walls will never forget. Clara takes a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. She can't tear her gaze away from Madame Lalaurie. The figure looms larger with each passing moment, as though she's becoming part of the very air around Clara, wrapping her in her presence. A flicker of movement catches Clara's eye. One of the tortured souls is standing just behind Lalaurie, its face frozen in a silent scream. The ghost's eyes meet Clara's, pleading. But then, in a split second, the room seems to shift. Clara's flashlight flickers again, revealing flashes of another scene. The figures that had been shuffling through the room are now frozen in place, their faces contorted in horror as Madame Lalaurie moves through them like a predator circling her prey. Clara watches, heart pounding in her chest, as Lalaurie steps to the side, lifting a long, slender hand to point at the frozen figures. These are my creations, Lalaurie says, her voice a soft purr, almost tender. They didn't understand, but they soon learned. I taught them the true meaning of fear. Clara's breath catches as she sees it, the horrific tableau unfolding in front of her. The figures of the victims appear to be caught in the moment of their suffering, some chained, some bruised and bloody, others with vacant eyes, resigned to their fate. The room is filled with these figures, their misery forever preserved in this living nightmare. Lalaurie turns toward Clara, her gaze now icy, almost possessive. They will never leave, Madame Lalaurie whispers, her words like ice slicing through Clara's soul. Not until someone understands what I did to them. Until someone feels it. You're here now, Clara. The house has claimed you as its own. A sound breaks through the suffocating silence, a soft scrape as chains begin to rattle in the darkness. The figures, now animated once more, begin to move again. They shuffle forward, eyes locked on Clara. She can feel the weight of their gaze, the intense hunger for acknowledgement, for recognition of their pain. Clara stumbles backward, her eyes wide with terror. She can't breathe. The shadows close in, and the room seems to pulse with the memories of 1,000 anguished souls. She feels a hand brush her shoulder, cold and clammy, the touch lingering for a moment longer than it should. A whisper low, guttural reaches her ear. "You can't escape." In an instant, the room shifts again. The figures of the tortured souls become more vivid, more real, and Clara realizes, with a sickening sense of horror, that they're not just ghosts, they're memories, trapped in a loop, living and reliving their torment. The walls groan and creak as the house seems to come alive, shifting and moving with a terrible, organic pulse. Clara backs up, her chest tight, and her eyes flick toward the door, but it's no longer there. It's gone, swallowed by the mansion's twisted wool. "You're part of the story now, Clara," Madame Lalaurie says, her voice cold as ice. "Just like the rest of them. The house, it remembers." Clara's mind spins, the weight of her realization crashing down on her. This house isn't just haunted, it is a prison, and she is now its prisoner, bound by the horrors of the past. The mansion itself is the keeper of its own history, its own violent, unyielding soul. Every crack in the walls, every whisper in the air, every shadow that slithers across the floor, it's all part of a never-ending cycle of suffering and torment, and Clara is now caught in its grasp. And as Madame Lalaurie steps forward, her eyes gleaming with a twisted satisfaction, Clara understands the truth: there is no escape. Clara can feel the floor beneath her shift, as though the very foundations of the mansion are moving, groaning under the weight of the past. The air is thick with the scent of decay, the sharp tang of old wood, and something far more sinister. Her heart pounds against her chest as she forces her legs to move, dragging herself toward the wall. But as her hand reaches out to steady herself, the surface feels wrong. Soft. Wet. She jerks her hand back, her breath hitching in panic. The wall isn't stone, it's flesh pulsing, breathing. A shudder runs through her body, and she quickly spins away, but the room feels smaller, tighter, as if the house itself is bending in around her, closing her in. The whispers are louder now, the voices surrounding her, suffocating her with their cries. You hear them too, don't you? You hear the screams, the wailing, the begging. The voice of Madame Lalaurie cuts through the cacophony, steady and cruel. This is their torment, and you will listen. You will understand what happens to those who are too weak to survive. Clara stumbles, falling to her knees as the room begins to spin. Figures appear in front of her, figures she recognizes, but they are twisted, not entirely human. They are the souls of the tortured, twisted, and broken by the cruel hand of Lalaurie. Shackles are still wrapped around their limbs, their faces streaked with dirt, blood, and agony. Their eyes are hollow, the light gone from them, but they see her. They reach for her, their fingers long and clawed, their movements jerky as though they are struggling to break free from invisible chains. One of them, a woman, crawls closer to Clara, her face a horrific mask of pain. She stops at Clara's feet and lifts her hand, trembling, to point at the shadows in the corner of the room. She did this, the woman rasps, her voice a tortured whisper. Madame Lalaurie, she took us and made us part of the house. She fed us to the walls, to the darkness. And now, you are part of it too. Clara's body trembles in terror, and she backs away, but the room is a maze of dark corridors, and every direction seems to lead her further into the nightmare. The whispers of the lost souls grow louder, more frantic, as if warning her, urging her to leave before it's too late. But how can she leave when the house itself is keeping her here? Every time she tries to move, the walls shift, the doors vanish, and she's pulled deeper into the maze of horror. Suddenly, the temperature drops, and a freezing gust of air slams against her skin. The cold feels like it's coming from the very walls, from the very breath of the house. And then a voice. Clara. This time, the voice is different. It's not the chorus of tortured souls. It's not even the commanding, omnipresent voice of Madame Lalaurie. This voice is softer, familiar. and it calls her name with an unnatural sweetness that curls her spine. Clara, come to me. Against her will, Clara follows the voice. Her feet seem to move of their own accord, leading her deeper into the mansion. The air is heavy with the weight of history, with the suffocating grief of the spirits trapped within these walls. She enters a new room, a grand chamber that seems to pulse with dark energy. It's here that she sees it, the centerpiece of the house, the symbol of Lalaurie's cruelty. At the far end of the room, surrounded by ornate furniture and cracked mirrors, stands a large, gilded mirror. The reflection is twisted. At first, Clara sees only herself, her wide-eyed expression filled with terror. But as her gaze lingers, something begins to shift in the reflection. The room behind her changes, the shadows growing deeper, darker. And there, standing in the mirror, is Madame Lalaurie herself, watching Clara with an unnerving, predatory smile. You don't understand, do you? Lalaurie's voice fills the room, her tone laced with dark amusement. This mirror is where it all began. I used it to see them, to watch them suffer, to feel their pain. Clara tries to turn away, but the reflection pulls her back. She feels an icy chill spread through her bones as she watches the images in the mirror shift. The faces of the tortured souls begin to emerge, one by one. Their eyes lock onto her, pleading for release, for recognition. They were all once like you, Lalaurie's voice echoes, her form in the mirror growing larger, more imposing. Curious. Naive. Thinking they could walk through my house and leave unscathed. But no one leaves, Clara. No one escapes. You'll join them, just like all the others. The figures in the mirror begin to move, their faces contorted with fear and suffering. Clara feels her own body grow cold as she watches, her body rooted to the spot, unable to look away. The whispers return, louder now, drowning out her thoughts, urging her to run, to escape, but she is frozen, captivated by the mirror's pull. As Lalaurie's reflection steps forward, Clara feels a pressure in her chest, as if the house itself is squeezing the air from her lungs. The walls pulse in time with her heartbeat, the mansion alive with energy, with the echo of its violent past. You are mine now, Madame Lalaurie's voice reverberates through the room, her eyes gleaming with malice. You will remember everything. Every scream. Every drop of blood. Every tortured soul. Clara struggles to breathe, to tear her eyes away from the mirror, but the pull is too strong. She feels her own reflection in the mirror start to change. Her face contorts in agony, her features twist in horror, until she is no longer Clara. She is one of them, the trapped, the tormented, the eternally lost. And then, in a final, terrifying moment, Clara understands. She isn't just a witness. She is part of it now. Part of the house, part of its history, part of the endless cycle of pain and suffering that Madame Lalaurie created. And the house will never let her go. Clara tries to scream, but no sound escapes her lips. Her throat is raw, her breath shallow, as if the air itself has turned to stone, thick and unyielding. The mirror's reflection is no longer just a twisted version of herself, it has become a grotesque tableau of agony and suffering. She sees herself standing there, but the image is distorted, shifting like water in a storm. The reflection of her face grows pale, gaunt, the eyes hollow and dark. Her mouth opens in silent, wordless screams, her hands reaching out as if begging for release. But as her reflection reaches back toward her, her body starts to tremble, an icy chill creeping up her spine. It's as though the mirror is pulling her in, dragging her into it. She tries to step back, but it's as if her feet are cemented to the floor. The house is pressing in from all sides, the walls breathing around her, constricting, and the whispers are everywhere now. Clara. The voice calls to her again, this time not from the mirror but from the walls, from the very floor beneath her feet. Clara, you belong here. You always have. She feels a sudden surge of anger, a desperate desire to fight back, to escape, to break free of the house's terrible grip. But the more she struggles, the tighter it gets. Her skin begins to crawl as unseen hands seem to reach out from the shadows, pulling at her, holding her in place, wrapping around her like chains of cold iron. Please. She manages to choke out, her voice hoarse, barely a whisper. Please, let me go. But there is no mercy here. No compassion. The house answers her with a low, guttural growl, a sound that seems to come from deep within the very heart of the mansion. The shadows shift again, and in the corner of the room, something moves. It's a figure, no, many figures. The tortured souls, their faces frozen in eternal suffering, now crowd the space around her, their eyes vacant but filled with an endless hunger. They are reaching out, dragging themselves forward, their movements jerky, inhuman. Their fingers scrape the floor, leaving behind long, bloody gouges. And then, out of the shadows, Madame Lalaurie steps forward, her presence so overwhelming that Clara feels her very soul shudder under its weight. She is standing so close now that Clara can see the faint traces of blood on her hands, the twisted smile on her lips. But it is her eyes, cold, calculating, full of malice, that seem to freeze Clara in place. You've seen them, Lalaurie says, her voice soft, almost melodic, as though she's sharing a secret. You've seen what I've done. What I created. What this house feeds on. Clara can feel the walls closing in, pressing in on her from all sides, the air thick with the oppressive weight of the past. The house itself is alive, and it is hungry. And now, it is feeding on her fear. Madame Lalaurie takes another step forward, her heels clicking on the floor like the tolling of a bell. The room darkens as her shadow grows larger, consuming the light. It won't end with you just seeing it, Lalaurie continues, her eyes gleaming with an almost tender amusement. You will feel it. You will become a part of it, just like all the others. You'll never leave. This house will never let you go. Clara feels a rush of cold, as though the very air is being sucked out of her lungs. Her vision starts to blur as the voices rise, louder, a cacophony of anguish, sorrow, and rage. The figures around her grow closer, their hands outstretched, their eyes pleading, empty. And then, just as she thinks she can't bear it any longer, everything goes still. The whispers fade, the shadows still, and the figure of Madame Lalaurie stops moving, her smile frozen in place. The room is silent, suffocatingly so, as though time has stopped. Clara blinks, confused, disoriented, and then a sudden crash, sharp and loud, as the door slams open behind her. The mansion groans, as if it's in pain. And from the darkness behind the door, a new figure emerges. A man. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark eyes that seem to see everything. Clara. His voice cuts through the silence, sharp and commanding. Get away from her. Before Clara can react, the figure moves toward her, reaching out with a hand, pulling her back from the mirror's pull, from the suffocating grasp of the house. The man stands between her and Madame Lalaurie, his presence a force against the oppressive power of the mansion. Madame Lalaurie steps back, her smile faltering for the first time, and for a moment, Clara sees something she hasn't before, a flicker of fear in the otherwise unflinching eyes of the woman who has ruled this place for so long. You think you can stop me? Lalaurie hisses, her voice low and threatening. You think you can take her from me? But the man doesn't answer. Instead, he stands tall and unmoving, the weight of his presence enough to hold the room at bay. And as the tension thickens in the air, Clara realizes something terrifying. The mansion is fighting to keep her. The floor beneath her begins to shake, the walls groaning, the shadows closing in once more. And as she looks at the man before her, the one who has come to her rescue, she sees the same dark reflection in his eyes that has haunted her since the moment she stepped foot in the mansion. He's not just here to save her. He's here to claim her, too. Just as the shadows seem to close in again, just as Clara feels her breath catch in her throat, the room shatters. Clara's footsteps echo in the silence as she carefully descends the narrow, winding staircase leading into the mansion's hidden cellar. The air grows colder with each step, and the darkness around her thickens, almost as if the shadows themselves are closing in. She reaches the bottom, and her breath fogs in the air. The stone walls feel damp, and the musty smell of decay fills her nostrils. It's here, deep in the bowels of the mansion, that something ancient stirs. In the center of the room, amidst broken furniture and shattered remnants of what was once a cruel confinement, Clara spots an old, cracked mirror leaning against the wall. Its surface is thick with dust, obscuring any clear reflection. Drawn to it, she reaches out, brushing her fingers across the glass. The moment she touches it, the dust falls away, revealing a faint, distorted reflection. But it's not just Clara she sees. Standing just behind her, barely visible in the dim light, is the figure of a woman. Tall, regal, her face pale and drawn, with eyes that seem to pierce through time itself. It's Madame Delphine Lalaurie, but not as Clara had imagined her from the stories. This version of Lalaurie is alive with malice, her smile twisted into something grotesque, a smile that seems to reach out of the mirror and into the room. Clara's heart skips a beat, and she spins around, but there's nothing there. Just the hollow silence of the cellar. She turns back to the mirror, the figure still there, but now the smile has grown wider. The woman's hand, cold and skeletal, begins to lift from the reflection, as if reaching across the glass. Clara's pulse races, her instincts screaming at her to run, but her body is frozen in place. The hand stretches farther, the air turning frigid. Then, as Clara's breath catches in her throat, a cold touch brushes her shoulder. It's ice, like the grip of death itself. A sharp pain cuts through her as if the touch is pulling her into the mirror, into that dark world where Lalaurie's atrocities never ended. Clara gasps and jerks away, but the grip tightens, pulling her back. The world around her starts to blur, the edges of reality distorting. Just before she can scream, everything goes black. The screen goes completely dark, leaving only silence in its wake. The echo of Clara's heartbeat thunders in the quiet, her fate uncertain. The camera lingers in the shadows of the Lalaurie mansion, the faintest whisper of a woman's voice, a faint, cruel laugh filling the void.